in Columbus Park, which is in the sort of heart of old Chinatown in New York City, in Manhattan.
Yeah.
This part of Manhattan's Chinatown is Cantonese, and it's like the most traditional Chinatown in New York.
So Andrew, tell me, how did you start to get interested in studying, Chinese cuisine so in depth?
Well, a few years ago, I ran across some photographs of Chinatown in New York. All the photographs of the streets had pictures of restaurants, but above the restaurant, it said Chop Suey. And then I realized that Chop Suey was completely enmeshed with the history of Chinese food in the United States.
Yes.
And beyond that, the history of Chinese food in the United States is completely enmeshed in the history of Chinese in the United States. And that led me to writing a book called Chop Suey, A Cultural History of Chinese Food in the United States.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit about the various cuisines, because there seems to be, not everybody's in agreement. So tell me, how many cuisines, how many styles do you really think there are in Chinese cooking, if you were to say?
Well, the styles that are here in the United States are predominantly Cantonese. But since then, they've also discovered Shanghainese food, Sichuan food, Hunan food, a little bit of Beijing food, and now they're beginning to explore more obscure Chinese foods. We're open to outside cuisines, and we're very curious about outside cuisines, but we're not good at accepting an entire foreign cuisine.
Right.
We pick and choose. A lot of this is based on immigration. Really at the heart of Chinese food in the United States is the question of how many Chinese immigrants are arriving in the United States and where are they coming from.
Right. So, Andrew, you said something about even if you're a writer and you came over, you could work in 2 different fields. Tell me a little bit about that.
The Chinese immigrants who were the first ones to come over here were only able to work in certain jobs. They might have been educated as teachers, as architects, as businessmen, but all they could find was working in some like hot and steamy laundry or behind a stove.
So how do you think that then affected the food?
These chefs, they were preparing Chinese food for the larger American community.
Right.
So it was to American tastes, not to Chinese tastes. This section of Lower Mott Street in Chinatown was the original heart of Chinatown. This was where the first Chinese community really formed in New York City. And if you look around, you'll see that the buildings here are old tenement buildings. This wasn't housing meant for rich people. This was housing meant for immigrants. And it was a perfect place for the Chinese to first find a foothold in New York. And if you look over here on the right at restaurants like Hop Key and Wo Hop, these are some of the last restaurants in Chinatown where they still sell the traditional Oisanese dishes.
So this is where Chop Suey began, in New York.
The community began to form here in the early 1880s. And during that time in New York, there were a group of artists and intellectuals who became known as bohemians.
Yes.
Because they were kind of like the hipsters of the day.
Yes.
And they loved exploring weird food. A group of them came down here to Lower Mott Street and saw a sign for a Chinese restaurant and decided to explore. The chef gave them a selection of dishes.
Yes.
And among that was something called chow chop sali.
Right.
Which they discovered was tasty and delicious.
So that they kept coming back for that thing?
Right, and one of the people in the meal wrote an article about it, and it began sending other people to Chinatown to taste this thing called chop sali, as they call it.